Okay, it always feels so good to see you. I think each time for me, the feeling good is better and better. I thought today I'd like to read directly from the Course, our little opening prayer. This is exactly what the Course says in chapter 3. Prayer is a way of asking for something. It is the medium of miracles. But the only meaningful prayer is for forgiveness, because those who have been forgiven have everything. Once forgiveness has been accepted, prayer in the usual sense becomes utterly meaningless. The prayer for forgiveness is nothing more than a request that you may be able to recognize what you already have. Yeah, let's read that again. Prayer is a way of asking for something. Prayer is the medium of miracles. Prayer is like the canvas on which we paint miracles, so to speak. But the only meaningful prayer is for forgiveness, because those who have been forgiven have everything. We're talking about forgiven as defined by Jesus in A Course in Miracles, for to give everything to the Holy Spirit. So those of us who have been forgiven, it means that we've offered everything and been completely purified of all attachment to personal identity, to the ego thought system. That's what being forgiven is about. And that process is a practice where we're willing to be informed by the Holy Spirit that we're actually the inner light, the light behind Jesus in the square. Light is the symbol of a oneness joined as one. There's that moment, where I pause or hesitate, because when we really start to relax into the willingness to forgive and be forgiven, and to turn to the Holy Spirit as our communication link and receive wisdom that ignites and increases the inner knowing that brings us here in the first place, more and more we experience ourselves as light. Maybe not literally, for you, that experience might be kinesthetic. It might be feelings in the body, buzzing, humming, tingling, or it might be sensing intuitively, your inner knowing. It could be visual. You might be somebody who sees auras, or is actually experiencing the edges of light that Jesus talks about in the workbook. I once said that workbook lesson literally tells us that we'll see light at the edges of everything, but it doesn't literally say that. It doesn't say we'll actually visually see that. You might not, but there's a sensing, there's a connecting with our essence, which you could say is light. And so we start to look through other people, through their personalities. We can see them with our eyesight, but we experience the sameness and the logic, the logical sensibleness of treating another lovingly as we receive the Holy Spirit's love within ourselves, and create a circle of praying to recognize what we already are and what we already have, opening to receive the ineffable, loving light that's beyond human comprehension, and yet we click with that, we tune in, allowing anything that is in our visual field to be seen through, so that there's a recognition of sameness and selflessness, generosity, because it only makes sense to be kind or giving to someone else, because we're enhanced and increased in that vision. And that's why I like to start our class every time with this: prayer for forgiveness is nothing more than a request that you may be able to recognize what you already have. And then when we reach chapter 4, we're told that having and being are the same. Having and being are the same. Having inner peace, being inner peace, it's the same. Having love, being love, having joy, being joy, having beauty, being beauty. As we practice this relationship with abstract ideas, becomes more and more familiar. I'm going to make a distinction between ideas and concepts. So I'm going to relegate concepts to the ego. The ego has us conceptualize everything, label everything, define everything, name everything, categorize. And those are all ways of keeping us mesmerized by externals and the outside world, and making it real through all that labeling and specializing, all the specialization. It's not just a bird, it's it's a red-winged blackbird. On and on and on. We love to do that. However, I'm going to suggest in this moment, ideaing, having a relationship with ideas, with the abstract, is following the Holy Spirit's pointing that we are beyond what meets the eye. We're the essence of what we seem to get from things that are pleasant to us. We don't just enjoy beauty on the outside through a sunset or a piece of art or anything, but we discover that we are that inner beauty. And that's a tremendous healing, because then we don't buy into all of the self-esteem issues that the ego burdens us with. I'm not good enough, I'm an imposter, I haven't lived up to my potential, all of that sort of thing. Or it settles us down and moves us away from grandiosity, a form of lying to ourselves that we're more capable or more wonderful than than we actually are as humans. Every once in a while I encounter that personality, but more so, you know, more so the feeling of disappointing ourselves or not being good enough. They're two sides of the same coin. Yeah, that's why lesson 5 tells us you're never upset for the reason you think. We think we're upset because of what's going on in the world, what's going on in our personal relationships, what's going on with our bodies, our health, our financial life, what's going on with our loved ones. Everything is externalized. Even relating to ourselves as a body is externalizing the idea of what we are. And so I thought it would be fun to start us off with a song. And this song is called That's Not the Reason Why, and some of you might be familiar with it. I think it was written and sung by Helena and Eric in 2010 in Mallorca when David Hoffmeister was having some kind of thing. But I encourage you to sing along because it's the same thing as when we breathe and it helps us relax, or when we get up and move and find our own rhythm. Well, the words of this song are so given by the Holy Spirit. The wisdom flowing through the song is amazing, and it's so lighthearted and fun that it should also be really relaxing and attuning. So here we go.
That's not the reason why. That's not the reason why. The problem's not out there. You have to look inside. That thing that someone did, the words that seem to hurt, are only in your mind, and that's where you must search. Do not be deceived by what is on the screen. Your whole mind's asleep, and in bitter griefs, the figures that you see are images, not real. Don't blame them anymore if you would truly heal. That's not the reason why. That's not the reason why. The problem's not out there. You have to look inside. That thing that's unwilling, the words that seem to hurt, are only in your mind, and that's where you must search. You haven't really failed. You haven't really lost. Your problems are out there. They're only in your thoughts. No secrets can be kept. Hold all things to the light. For secrecy is death. It lets the darkness hide. That's not the reason why. That's not the reason why. The problem's not out there. You have to look inside. The thing that's unwanted, the words that seem to hurt, are only in your mind, and that's where you must search. Forgiveness is the way to see that the false as false. My child, no more delay, but answer Spirit's call. The Christ beside you stands, and hold a lamp of peace to light the way within, where you will find release. That's not the reason why. That's not the reason why. The problem's not out there. You have to look inside. The thing that's unwanted, the words that seem to hurt, are only in your mind, and that's where you must sin. And let them be dissolved by the light of love within. That's not the reason why. That's not the reason why. The problem's not out there. You have to look inside.
Oh, wasn't that fun?
That was fun.
It was so nice to hear you sing and do a little harmonizing and vocalizing. And isn't that an incredible insight? The words of that song, just condensing A Course in Miracles down to 5 minutes. Yeah. So hopefully you're feeling a little looser and you can kick off your shoes. You can tune into your breath. I invite you to do anything to relax. You can squeeze your muscles so that then you loosen up so that we become physically more porous, more absorbent. So as we explore A Course in Miracles, how we're using the teaching, how we're feeling it, how we're experiencing it, that it really, we're marinating and being permeated by the wisdom, the deeper language beneath the words of the Course. We're reinforcing by coming together the knowing that we already have. We're developing more and more trust in Jesus, our brother and our friend, who is channeling the Holy Spirit, which is the voice for God. We're here to allow the reality of God to shift our mind, to heal the split mind, and bring us into a shift in perception where we know everything as it truly is. I just started doing the workbook again for the first time in many years with a couple of friends. And we're only up to lesson 3. So I noticed, the first lesson is nothing I see means anything. If you leave out in this room, out this window, just nothing I see, the word see is significant in the early lessons. Nothing I see with my eyes, with eyesight, means anything. And we work with specifics in the early lesson, but I'm at the point where, I'm realizing, it's because the ego doesn't mean anything. So everything that's external doesn't mean anything. It's a story, it's engrossing, while we're still in that semi-state of operating in this world as if we are this person. We don't want to deny that. And yet we start to really get that we're in this world, but not of it. And that's why Ken Wapnick says, never let the metaphysics of the Course get too far from your mind. But at the same time, be a normal person, is how Ken would say it. Yeah, so we're making that shift. We're reinforcing reality with a capital R simply by sitting together. And the more relaxed we are, that is the undoing process. The only thing that keeps the curtain or the veil or the smoke screen of the visual world and all the senses. You know, if you're blind, if you can't use eyesight, the other senses are keeping this veil, this curtain down that tells us that we are concrete. And relaxing is undoing fear. Part 1 of the workbook, which is 220 lessons, is all about undoing the way we see now. And then the second part of the workbook is the acquisition of true perception, is really starting to allow the light to penetrate and infiltrate our understanding of everything. And the only way that we can receive the light is by being willing to face fear and see through fear. Start to see that fear doesn't make any sense. So even though in my email, I said we were going to look at the end of chapter 8, that actually brought me to the very beginning of chapter 9, the acceptance of the atonement. We're looking at part 1, the acceptance of reality. So first, let's just clarify that the atonement in A Course in Miracles means the correction to our mistaken identity that we have identified as an I, and an I believes that it's separate from God. The atonement is the correction to that mistaken thought. And the atonement is also described as being the only weapon that the Holy Spirit uses against the ego. And it's one-sided. So it doesn't cut both ways the way a physical sword would. It only cuts one way, which is love. The atonement is also called the love principle. So the only way that the Holy Spirit would, quote unquote, defend against or fight the ego is by doing nothing, because there's nothing to be done. But that not doing of anything is its natural state of just extending love. So the atonement is love, and the atonement is the correction. So if we accept the love and the correction that the Holy Spirit offers, then we're also accepting reality. And this first part is called the acceptance of reality. The reality of God, reality with a capital R. Okay, now it would be so nice if somebody would read. Can we get a volunteer to read the first paragraph? Don? And then Faden, I see you too, so I'm going to ask you to.
Okay, read the first paragraph.
Yeah.
The acceptance of
And Don, I'm just going to remind everybody, just absorb. You don't even need to understand the words, because we'll do 2 readings at least. So the first reading, let's just absorb and not have to figure anything out with the ego mind.
Okay. Fear of the will of God is one of the strangest beliefs the human mind has ever made. It could not possibly have occurred unless the mind were already profoundly split, making it possible for it to be afraid of what it really is. Reality cannot, quote, threaten anything except illusions, since reality can only uphold truth. The very fact that the will of God, which is what you are, is perceived as fearful demonstrates that you are afraid of what you are. It is not then the will of God of which you are afraid, but yours.
And then allow your breathing to be the way that you're absorbing this truth. Allow yourself to relate to your breath as the Holy Spirit, so close, so intimate. And now, Faden, could you read the first paragraph again? Nice and slow. And this time, if you'd like to listen to the words, then you can do that.
The acceptance of reality. Fear of the will of God is one of the strangest beliefs the human mind has ever made. It could not possibly have occurred unless the mind were already profoundly split, making it possible for it to be afraid of what it really is. Reality cannot threaten anything except illusions, since reality can only uphold truth. The very fact that the will of God, which is what you are, is perceived as fearful demonstrates that you are afraid of what you are. It is not then the will of God of which you are afraid, but yours.
Thank you, Faden, and thank you, Don. So let's take this in. Jesus is sitting with us right here in this room, and he's with you always. And he says to us, let's talk about reality. And then he explains, fear of the will of God is one of the strangest beliefs the human mind has ever made. It could not possibly have occurred. The fear of the will of God could not possibly have occurred unless the mind were already profoundly split, making it possible for the mind to be afraid of what the mind really is. So the human mind is the secondary split. It's the physical world split. But before that, there's the split in the mind, in the Son of God mind, where it follows the tiny mad idea. That's what Jesus means when he says, we couldn't hold this strange human belief unless the mind were already profoundly split when it believed that it accomplished the separation from the oneness joined as one, which is God mind. And once it believed that, it was capable of being afraid of God. It made it possible for the Son of God to somehow be afraid of his Father, even though that does not make any sense. Reality cannot, quote unquote, threaten anything because reality is love, is light, is life. And love by its very nature is only loving. And light by its very nature cannot contain darkness. And life by its nature cannot hold death. So there's nothing to threaten and nothing to be threatened by. But this is something that we need to reacquaint ourselves with because we've just been so thorough and we've lied to ourselves so many times and covered the truth with so many stories that the forgiveness practice is the undoing of all of this layering of imaginary identity. We're just peeling away layers and layers and layers of identity. The very fact that the will of God, which is what you are, is perceived as fearful demonstrates that you are afraid of what you are. That's why we begin each class with help me recognize what I already am. Help me recognize that, because the only reason I'm not knowing that is that I'm scaring myself, but I don't know that I'm scaring myself, or I don't know how to stop scaring myself. Or I would like to stop scaring myself. Like we start to become more and more open and willing and know what we didn't know before. So it is not then the will of God of which we are afraid, but our own will, our willfulness. Now, for me, for some reason, I always pictured the will of God as an electrical outlet with a big, thick wire, a cord, which I sometimes experience as an umbilical cord, that I'm never separate from God. I'm always tied with this umbilical cord. But I can play this make-believe game where I pull the plug out. And then all I have is this imaginary will, a personal will, which is so weak and inadequate compared to full power when I simply plug the cord back into the God outlet. I've had at least one course student argue, and this is good because it was honest, argue that he did not want to plug into or connect with the will of God because it took away his sense of agency. It took away the fun of him becoming himself, making his art, being in charge of whatever it was he wanted to do, the adventures of his life. And the idea of plugging into the will of God made him feel acquiescent and obedient and like he was being stripped of his independence. He did not experience that idea as empowering. Until the idea of reconnecting with the will of God is empowering to you, you'll resist it. And that's one of the many shifts, when we start to do the workbook practice, that we start to have, that what's initially frightening starts to become appealing. What's, initially threatening, or we don't even realize we're doing it, it's unconscious, starts to come out into the open and then starts to be purified of shameful feelings and guilty feelings. And we start to see this is how the ego operates. And that reduces fear. I often have the feeling that fear is not actually reduced. You're either afraid or you're not, but we have these oscillations where we move into fearlessness and then we, snap back into a fear-based state. And then the willingness moves us into fearlessness and we get more comfortable with fearlessness. And fearlessness is freedom. So one of my personal prayers is, Holy Spirit, help me know myself as fearless and free. Yeah, that's a really good prayer for me. I open up right away. There's always this holding. The ego is grasping and clutching and clenching and holding. It's holding onto thin air. And we don't realize how much we're in an ongoing state of gripping and how limiting and constricting that is to us on all levels: psychological, emotional, physical, physiological, the inside of our physicality, and mentally, and Yeah. So if you have a prayer, or if you find a certain way of breathing, or if chanting, or taking a walk, or anything that helps you unclench, there's so many ways that makes you more available to receiving guidance from the Holy Spirit. I often mention that we can show up for guidance and not wait around to receive it. We might think we've done our bit by running to the altar and handing something over, and then turning our back on spirit and not pausing to allow whatever healing could be felt. We're guaranteed in A Course in Miracles that we receive a healing no matter what. The more we stick around for it, the more we climb the ladder back to heaven, the more we acquire a new normal, which is much less driven by worldly dictates and worldly concerns. So let's read the next paragraph, because it's a blockbuster. I'd like someone to read the magnificent paragraph 2.
I can read.
That would be beautiful.
Your will is not the ego's, and that is why the ego is against you. What seems to be the fear of God is really the fear of your own reality. It is impossible to learn anything consistently in a state of panic. If the purpose of this course is to help you remember what you are, and if you believe that what you are is fearful, then it must follow that you will not learn this course. Wow. Yet the reason for the course is that you do not know what you are. Just makes me think of like my first job I ever had, and how, I was just so worked up and just I couldn't learn anything. I didn't know anything of what was happening. It was just so much chaos, it felt. So that's what I can see in my mind, this trying to learn at 14 years old to be a waitress,
Mhm.
So, wow. And that's amazing. Wow. It just says it right there. If you're fearful, then you're not going to learn it. So,
Mhm.
wow. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that reading, Otzi. And who would like to read it a second time?
I'll read it.
Thank you, Nabodi.
Your will is not the ego's, and that is why the ego is against you. What seems to be the fear of God is really the fear of your own reality. It is impossible to learn anything consistently in a state of panic. If the purpose of this course is to help you remember what you are, and if you believe that what you are is fearful, then it must follow that you will not learn this course. Yet the reason for the course is that you do not know what you are. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So just, breathe that in, sponge that in, and, feel or think whatever is coming up for you.
May I share?
Sure.
So this reminds me of, or part of this paragraph reminds me of how difficult it is to learn something when you're in a state of panic. I I was a drug and alcohol counselor for over 20 years. And I got to say that about the first 6 years, I had there's actually a name for it, imposter syndrome. I really felt like somebody was going to find out that I did not know what the hell I was doing. And, and that wasn't true. I had my own personal experience, but I had more than that. I had clinical training and, so it wasn't true that I didn't know what I was doing, but it felt that way. And I remember I had a very understanding supervisor. She was very good at that time. And, we talked about it and that helped some. But anyway, so that reminded me in this paragraph of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely relate to imposter syndrome and the feeling, that you're an imposter and you're just pretending to be an expert at something that you feel inside that you're not, even though you know that actually you are pretty good at this thing and that you do have experience to offer. And I have felt exactly the same way. In fact, maybe I've shared with the group that when I was training to be a Gestalt psychotherapist, and you had to take group therapy as one of the courses. Everybody dreaded it because you're exposed. And I had this big insight and shared with the group, I need you to see the best in me and give me the benefit of the doubt, because I tend to give myself a bad rap and say negative things about myself that are, worse than I really am. It's not really true. So that was a big shift for me. And when you said, Namodi, that your supervisor helped you with that, I feel like when we're open-hearted, when something in us is willing and ready enough, that all sorts of humans stand in for the Holy Spirit, that they see the best in us. They give us the benefit of the doubt. They love us in one way or another. And if we can accept that love, it reinforces the healing, because we're using this world and our relationships as our classroom. Right now, we're practicing with what we have outpictured. We've outpictured the whole thing. And the way we see it is the way we're going to know ourselves. So that's beyond, the secret, teaching the law of attraction or manifestation. It's not just, visualize everything as wonderful and, then you'll get a piece of wonderful in whatever specific forms you want. This is the actual essence of wonderful, with a capital W, of truth, of God, of being. The thing that this paragraph does for me, why do I get so excited about it? First of all, I tend to capitalize certain letters in the course. So in paragraph 2, where it says, your will is not the ego's, I capitalize the W in will, because he's speaking to the decision maker. Jesus is saying, Son of God, lost in ego identity, but present enough to have this book in your hand and to be interested in what I, Jesus, have to say to you. So we could call that the decision maker. Decision maker, your will with a capital W, your real will is not the ego's. And that is why the ego is against you. Now, when we first read this, we don't know that the ego is against us. So we're just hearing that for the first time, the second time, the 20th time. We still may not get what he means, that the ego is against us. And it's really essential as a course student to start to realize that the ego does not have our best interests at heart, and that we do not know what is in our best interest. The only way that we can take good care of ourselves is to plug back into God's will through Jesus and the Holy Spirit and start to recognize that that flow, that powerful flow of however we experience love, self-esteem, a lack of deprivation, the proper use of denial or lack, to deny the ego, to deny scarcity, to start to feel an ongoing sense of well-being. That's when we really start to get that this I identity, which we call ego, is not good for us. Being me is not good for me. So your will, Jesus tells us, is not the ego's, it's God's. That's what your will really is. And that's why the ego is against you, because the ego doesn't want you to remember that your will is actually God's will. Because in that moment, the atonement takes place and the correction occurs, and we're in a state of nothing happened. Nothing's actually happened. I was dreaming a dream. For a moment, I'm aware, like, oh, that was, wait, what? And then it's done. Then it's done. Of course, in the process of using time to awaken from time, it seems like we climb the ladder back to heaven. We start to experience what the Course calls the happy dream, which is a state of mind. It has nothing to do with the circumstances of your life. And the happy dream leads to the real world, or you might say they're one and the same. And the real world, I'm going to say, is the gates of heaven. We're right at the gates of heaven at that point. And Jesus tells us in the Course that we can't sustain that state of mind in a body. So the body is about to just, disappear, evaporate, and God lifts us up from there. It's just a beautiful symbolic way of describing what other non-dual paths describe. But with this particular kind of language and imagery. So he goes on to say, what seems to be the fear of God is really the fear of your own reality with a lowercase r, ego reality, the physical world. It's very scary here. We're very vulnerable and fragile here. It is impossible to learn anything consistently in a state of panic. And Nabodhi gave us a great example of that. And so did Audzi. We're too interrupted. We're too distracted. We're too dreading of horrible consequences and catastrophic outcomes. I'm not going to be able to do this job. I'm going to be fired. I'm not really helping anybody, even though I'm in the role of helper, on and on. It's impossible to learn anything consistently in a state of panic. But that's because we're depending on our own willpower, lowercase w, ego willpower. And that's not going to serve us. We might be happy for a while, and we might be going through a good stretch in our lives, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it has nothing to do with awakening. And the flip side of it is that at any moment that could change. Then Jesus says, if the purpose of this course, of A Course in Miracles, is to help you remember what you are, and if you believe that what you are is fearful, if you believe that God is a threat, then it must follow that you will not learn this course. So we have to untangle our fear. We have to become aware of unconscious fear. We have to become aware that that fear has been embedded by the ego and that it's just a trick, a manipulation. It's just a claim that God is treacherous and punishing. It's not true. It's fake news. It's misinformation. So if the purpose of this course is to help you remember what you are, and that is the purpose of this course, and that's why we state that at the beginning of every class, and if you believe that what you are is fearful, then it must follow that you will not learn this course. But Jesus has full faith in us that we're willing to trust him. And by the way, I would capitalize what you are. So the W of what, the Y of you, and the A of R. All throughout the course, I'm busy capitalizing the first letters of this phrase, what you are. What you are, what I am, that is the truth of God. It is, we are not the me. We are not the person. Yet the reason for this course is that you do not know what you are. Now, I would just like to say, and Jesus is in the room, that many of us have been studying the course and doing spiritual practices for many years and are much more aware of what we are. So Jesus wrote the course for Helen and for everyone. And it was a beginning course. And when we finish the workbook, he says, this is a beginning, not an end. So when we keep coming back to the course, it's no longer necessarily true that we don't know what we are. I think that we're actively in the process of surrendering the ego, and in so doing, discovering what we are. And that's encouraging and deserving of reinforcement. Because that discovery is not made by the person. It's made by the person falling into the background and little by little dissolving. And interestingly, we're still fully capable of functioning in the dream game until we've concluded the process of awakening. So I don't want us reading the course in a stuck way where we start to tell ourselves, oh, I don't know what I really am. That would be a misuse of the wisdom. We're discovering what we are. We're doing that by facing fear, trusting the Holy Spirit, relaxing, using the body as a vehicle for communication, showing up, being honest with the Holy Spirit, being honest with ourselves, being honest with each other, recognizing humans who are serving as a miracle worker for us in any given moment. It could be an ongoing relationship. It could be a momentary relationship. Somebody in an elevator, somebody at a cash register. Becoming more aware of when we are the miracle worker and something in us opens up and there's a flow and a giving that's totally selfless and unconditional, and oh, that felt good. And noticing when we're agitated or upset or scared and in need of a miracle worker, and accepting giving and receiving is the same, and we need to be able to do both, give and receive. And receiving can be very, very vulnerable. You know, it's very common that people hate to ask for help. So finding in ourselves, can I ask for help? Can I receive help when it's given unasked? Can I say thank you? Can I say you're welcome? These are very basic things. Instead of saying, if somebody gives you a compliment, instead of saying, oh, that's nothing, can I say thank you and connect? Or if somebody thanks us, can we say, you're welcome, my pleasure? Can we savor the moment? Very, very simple, mundane interactions that can use time in this very rich way for connection instead of disconnection, for the elasticity of time rather than always rushing and hurrying. Okay, Vicky, do you want to ask your question?
I was going to, if it's okay. What I got was when you said about the imposter situation. I just finished my second year of doing the lesson. So I've been doing the course for 2 years. And all of a sudden I realized that I feel like I'm an imposter doing the course sometimes. I'm like, I think I'm getting it. And then and then all of a sudden I'll be like, you're not getting it. You don't know what you're doing. And what are you doing? And then fear comes in. And it's just this weird thing that I go like back and forth with, because I know I haven't been doing it very long, but it's been really intense for me and almost like a speed up sometimes with my situation. But sometimes I just all of a sudden I'll just be in this panic of, you don't know what the hell you're doing and who are you? And it's just all this fear comes up, and I know that must be the ego trying to get me to stop doing it. But
yeah, it's all ego, and interrupting it by naming ego, using the ego's tool against it, that the ego likes to name everything, to catch, like, yeah, now I'm telling myself I'm an imposter. I'm not doing this course correctly. That has to be the voice of the ego because it's critical and shaming.
right.
And then you're just like, Jesus, I just caught it. Here it is. Can we look together? And then the fear comes up and you can breathe into the fear. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Vicky, because facing fear by breathing through it is very powerful. It's like fear is here. And this is how I'm feeling it. And fear can be felt in so many different ways. So, maybe it's my heart is beating faster, or it's difficult to get an inhale, or my hands are trembling, or my head feels like I can't think, or I'm having a lot of fear thoughts. I'm being flooded with fear thoughts. There's so many ways. I'll see you next Wednesday. Mwah.